And we are ready, except I need to mute this. And here we go. Welcome everyone to today's special event, Under the Cottonwood Tree, with Paul and Carlos Meyer. I'm Dr. Theresa Rojas, Professor of English and Professor of Ethnic Studies here at Modesto Junior College, which is located in California's beautiful Central Valley. I'm also the director of the Latinx Comic Arts Festival, where we celebrate Latinx comic arts creators, cartoonists, artists, animators, writers, and educators. While the physical event takes place on the campus of Modesto Junior College, we recently celebrated this year's event virtually, and you can see all of the panels and content by visiting the Latinx Comic Arts Festival channel on YouTube. I'm currently teaching an introduction to children's literature, and my class is studying the graphic novel Under the Cottonwood Tree by Paul Meyer, Margaret Hardy, and Carlos Meyer. So this is a special event, our last of the semester, where we're featuring co-creators, Paul and Carlos Meyer, who have generously agreed to speak with us today about the book and more, so that our students and the public can participate. Tonight's event is being live streamed to YouTube, where attendees can comment and ask questions of our special guests. And now I'd like to introduce co-creators of Under the Cottonwood Tree, Paul and Carlos Meyer. Paul Meyer is the youngest of 9 children and raised in the outskirts of Albuquerque, New Mexico. Though growing up poor, he never felt poor because he was too busy building tree houses in the bosque and playing and swimming in the Rio Grande to pay attention to any economic inequalities. He hopes to capture a sense of childlike innocence and rural ambiance in his storytelling. Paul left Albuquerque after high school and has been working in Hollywood ever since. In addition to stints as an actor, writer, and director, he recently penned the cult hit comic book Sod, a comedy horror about a small town being overrun by carnivorous grass. His latest project, a graphic novel entitled Under the Cottonwood Tree, which we're going to discuss tonight, has been gaining notoriety with 6 National Book Awards, adopted as part of college curricula, and as an anchor text for numerous elementary schools. Very exciting. As a proud Chicano, he strongly desires to shine a light on his people and culture. To quote the poet laureate of New Mexico, Levi Romero, quote, "We are the orphaned ones whom Spain abandoned, Mexico did not adopt, and the US never wanted," end quote. In spite of this, or perhaps because of it, New Mexico is truly a land of enchantment. And with these cuentos, Paul hopes to show an audience just how enchanting it can be. Welcome, Paul.
Hello, everybody.
Carlos Meyer draws upon his upbringing in Alameda, New Mexico, and hailing from a family of 9 children. Carlos hopes to bring a sense of family and tradition to his writing, while co-author Paul spent many years in Hollywood, as we just heard, after high school. Carlos remained home in New Mexico, earning a degree in journalism while working at his grandfather's ranch in northern New Mexico. Having raised a family and retired now, he spends his time focusing on his writing. With Under the Cottonwood Tree, the authors hope again to shine a light on the culture and people of New Mexico. Carlos is currently working on a children's picture book titled Marisol's Monsters, with illustrations by his daughter, Marisol. Welcome, Carlos.
Thank you, Professor.
I want to thank you both so much for being here today, for joining us, for allowing us to ask questions, and to share that this was originally going to be a class-only event. I had asked Paul and Carlos to join my class for a Q&A, but we had such a good time on the panel, the Saturday panel last month for the Latinx Comic Arts Festival, that I just wanted to bring them both together again in conversation and really welcome these 2 brothers. I think it's an original event to have 2 brothers working together on a graphic novel. So that's really special. And they've been kind enough to agree to share their time with us, not only with my class, but with the world potentially, right? So
Whoever's watching right now, right?
No pressure, no pressure.
Oh, no.
And
Whoever's
just
out there.
a reminder to our YouTube audience that you may ask questions or comment at any time, and we will bring those over to the Zoom and get to as many questions as we can. I want to start us off today, if you don't mind, with this question of collaboration. As brothers collaborating, tell us about the process of creating the book, of coming together to do this, of the good, the bad, and the escándalo, if you will.
Yes, for sure. Well, we'll get to the scandalous part of it. I guess we just start from the beginning, right, Carlos? It was
No, that sounds good. You
yeah.
can,
So growing up in Alameda, New Mexico, right next to the Bosque. So we have a big backyard, and Carlos one year decides to raise some calves, and he was going to butcher them and or take them to the butchers and raise a little cash. So at one point during the calf years, cheap labor is what I was. So Carlos would be utilizing my brother Kevin and my brother Sebastian, and then myself, because we were the youngest ones. So we would be running around, racing these cattle around, or trying to get them in the pens. And they'd escape and go off and run down the ditch, and we'd have to chase them back. And after one strenuous day of that, I had a dream that involved the day's activities, which was running after the cattle, these calves. And it was, I was talking to my brother Dennis and asking him, making fun of these calves. And all of a sudden the calf talked. And I was like, oh, wow. And I told this to Carlos, and Carlos like, this sounds like a children's book. And he took that idea and ran with it and took it to my brother Julio illustrated it. And that's me as a little kid. And this was the original version of Under the Cottonwood Tree. And so in the end, Carlos still owes me money for wrestling those cattle all the time. Right?
well, let me tell you my version, Paul. Well, anyway, I was going to, I think I was 19 or 20. I had just started. I was a freshman at New Mexico Highlands University, and I was studying writing. It's a college in northern New Mexico, a predominantly Hispanic college. And I would come home for the summers, and I would try to make money. And the way to make money in that area was agriculture. So I would go to these feedlots and buy calves and raise them, and I would take them to the sale barn. And fortunate for me, and unfortunately for Paul, is well, no, it was a good gig. I guess
it was. I don't even know if you actually did pay us, but it was a summer gig. But we were just kids.
But they helped raise the cows, and they got away, and then he told me about that dream, and then my older brother Julio and we said, well, this will make a fantastic book. And so in fact, I'm going to grab this picture right behind me. I hope I don't break it. There it is. So this is one of the original illustrations. My oldest brother Julio, he was a fantastic artist, so he illustrated it, and he illustrated the book about a boy that encounters a talking calf. So these are all my brothers and sisters. There's Sharon, Sebastian, Cindy.
Well, there's, I think, no, one's missing, right? Because there's how many are there?
I'm not there. I don't think I'm there.
Yeah, oh, that's what it is. Okay. Yeah, you're not there.
Do you recognize this guy right in the middle? Looks just like.
That's literally a photo based on a photo that Carlos took and then Julio illustrated.
So what we did then is I wrote the book, and we shopped it around. We shopped around. We went to all these. We knew the big publishing houses were in New York City. So we must have sent out like 40 copies to New York. We got rejection out of rejection. Nobody was picking up Hispanic stuff. But it was to our surprise, or to our we got happy when Tita Soul out of Berkeley, California picked up our book. In fact, Paul's going to show it to you right now. The story, and they published it. Yeah. They're the ones who got Rudolph Anaya started with.
Yeah,
they first started, and they picked it up right away. Yeah. And so and then I continued with my going to school. And while I was going to school, we had a visiting professor from California, and she taught a screenwriting class. I said, I'll take the screenwriting class. So I took the screenwriting class, and I said, well, I'll just write about the book. So I made it a whole big screenwriting assignment. She loved it. And since Paul was over there in Hollywood, I showed it to him. And once I showed it to him, we polished it, went back and forth. And go ahead from here, Paul.
That's a good to speak about the collaboration, because originally it's a dream that I had. Carlos polishes it and makes it into a children's story with Julio. And then eventually I'm in Hollywood, and I'm sitting there in the middle of the desert near Bakersfield, getting tossed into a dirt hole repeatedly, because there's one time when I actually did play a good guy, but I was a good guy who got killed. So I was supposed to be a cop, and the bad guy shoots me, and he keeps tossing me into a hole in the ground. And then so the end of that day, I'm on my way home, back to LA, and I pull over to the side of the road because I realize there are dust or sand mites all over me. And I'm like, wow, this is ridiculous. So I had to take all my clothes off and I had these squibs that had like bruises all over my chest. I go, man, why am I working for this guy? I got to make my own stuff. I got to try to make my own movies. And about that same time, Carlos sent me over this copy of the script, and I go, oh my gosh, I remember this. This can be the Chicanos' never-ending story, or a Hispanic version of Wizard of Oz. I've never yet seen those movies out there. So I'm like, okay, let's get this. Let's start working on it. So eventually the collaboration started where we would take it piece by piece, tweak some lines here. At the time I was taking classes with Professor Richard Walters over at UCLA, and I get feedback from him, and then eventually we're just moving and getting it better and better. And then we decide, well, we can't. I'm not going to wait for this to be made as a movie. I'm going to do it as a graphic novel. So that's when we found Margaret Harty and J.C. Kroll, and we worked on I pictured it as a movie, right? So it's going to be an independent movie, but an independent graphic novel. And JC and Margaret were my cameramen. They were my actors. They were my sound visuals. I took a picture of the New Mexican sunset, and I said, this is your color palette. And then she went from there. And then here we are. There you go.
Yeah.
That's the Bosque. That's New Mexico. So what we're trying to do with this is, at one part, share the experience of our youth growing up next to the river, and the adventures that we'd have jumping in the tree, making tree houses and swimming in the river. So there's the sense of innocence with that. And then another part of it, what we're trying to do is capture a time and place of a New Mexico that hardly exists anymore, unfortunately. Our mother, Consuelo Lucero, was born next to the Pecos River in a little village called Anton Chico. And Anton Chico, it's a transitional period back in the 1940s and 50s where it was only Spanish spoken there, and English wasn't predominantly spoken. It wasn't until she went to her first school as a young child that she was introduced to English. So we're trying to capture the small villages that we love, because when we go through New Mexico and you go through Tecolote or Row, New Mexico, these small villages are they're the adobe they're adobe playgrounds. I mean, that's why someone like Georgia O'Keeffe came to New Mexico and fell in love with it, right?
Yes. So I like to do is just kind of paint a picture of the culture we're starting to capture. I've mentioned this before, but Mark Twain, and I don't want to compare us to Mark Twain, but anyway, he captured a place and time in the Mississippi Valley with Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn, the characters. Mm. So we said, well, we have in the upper Rio Grande Valley, when the Rio Grande starts from the Colorado goes, not the lower Rio Grande Valley, that's the Texas region. We have our culture, our pocket culture. And so we're capturing a place and time with that same pocket culture. Just like Paul said, up and down, there's from Colorado, like Antonito, Colorado, all the way to Socorro, New Mexico, these little villages everywhere. When the one we grew up in Alameda, there's Antochico, there's the big owl, Tecolote, and then there's the little owl, Tecolotito. So there's up and down, there's, and I want to introduce the word here, and that's linguistics imperialism. That's when the dominant language takes over. Unfortunately, in northern New Mexico, the dominant language was the English, and it kind of took over, but we still captured the flavor of the Spanish of New Mexico.
Sure.
Can you spell that word for us, please, so I can look it up?
Linguistics. Good thing I'm not a good speller, so I wrote it down. So let me LINGUISTICIMPERIALISM. Linguistics imperialism. It happens like within the third generation. The first generation is the one language. The second generation they spoke both languages, and the third generation, takes over.
I see a question here, and I want to answer, but since we're speaking about language, I want to speak about Nazario Garcia. He helped put together this book, or I think he helped put together, I'm not sure, a dictionary of New Mexico and Southern Colorado Spanish. But he has this great, and this is his latest book. He really captures the language, these little Northern New Mexico colloquialisms that we know, but like say my fiance from El Salvador, she doesn't recognize these little Spanish colloquialisms. But so we're trying to keep that true to it. But so one student asks, why fairy tale? What is about the fairy tale form that spoke to you? I want
to mention, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I want to mention that so in the Intro to Children's Literature course, we are in our final module of the semester, and we're studying fairy tales. So this comes out of, it's sort of a cheating question, I just realized. It's one of the questions I asked them. Yeah. But so we're studying how these stories fit into the classic fairy tale form, but also what this brings to the form that is new, or that is maybe unseen, or that is compelling in different ways. So I think that's where the question is coming from.
Well, I would say why fairy tales, because, well, in the 1980s, when I was a kid and I was watching these fantastical movies like Never Ending Story, fell in love with that movie when I was a kid. And I realized years later that's Wizard of Oz is considered the first American fairy tale, I believe. But when I came to Hollywood, I realized there are no Chicano fairy tales, at least I was aware of. There probably were, but maybe they're percolating. So I specifically thought a fairy tale world would be something that the children would gravitate towards, and they could read this book, but not realize that they're actually absorbing another culture, because they're just having fun with these monsters and magic. So to me, it just felt natural, because I had not seen stories like this, and I wanted to make my own. Is that what you'd say, Carlos?
I would say, yeah, it was that one. Fairy tales are appealing to everybody. They're appealing to everybody. It's a short version of them is the cartoons you watch on TV. And so, and we were drawn to it as kids. We love comic books, we love fairy tales, and so this is kind of like a natural quotation of what we wrote about.
Yeah.
So I want to go to another question, and I'm going to add to this question actually. So okay. Shane's asking about themes, intended themes, but I'd like to add to that, what are maybe some of the themes that you hope your audience gets out of it, right? But also maybe some unintended themes or some surprising things. Those are my favorite things that you are hearing back from your audiences that perhaps you didn't expect.
I could definitely. There's a few things I'll chime in here with Carlos. But we did a really fun library talk with a library in Chicago, and Miss Kelly Campos's Cookies and Comics, she called it. And we didn't realize that there was a girl there that really identified with the Native American character. And you're in Chicago. How is she but she gravitated towards it because it was a solo character and she was by herself, and she identified it with that. So that's one thing that I didn't realize we were speaking of. But as far as the themes, I really wanted a forgiveness. It really, for me, it had to be, here's a woman who is scarred and she's reaching out in anger, but don't answer it with anger. So to me, my main themes are family unity, and because brothers always fighting, okay, and then forgiveness. How about you, Carlos?
I agree. The main theme was the susto, the curanderas forgiving her. But with that theme, other themes, like Professor Rojas, you're asking, other themes came up. The theme of love, the theme of the relationship between the two women, the theme of friendship between Monri and the Pueblo Indian, and then his best friend Amadeo.
Yeah.
The theme of relationships within the families. The theme of how Tio Jose, he loved his beer and his cheese tacos. Is that a theme?
That's a good theme. I like that theme right there.
Theme. Who doesn't like cheese and beer?
Cheese and beer.
Who doesn't? So there's a theme right there. Yes.
Listen, I'm going to use books in my classes that reference tacos. Extra credit for all around. I think this is an important
Yes.
in Latinx culture.
Well, and in New Mexico, we have to have our bean and cheese tacos with either red or green chili, or both, and then we call it Christmas.
Okay, I gotta say something here. Okay, I apologize for going off track here, but Paul and I went to LA we got one of our biggest awards was we got the best graphic novel award for
International Latino Book Awards.
Latino book, and it was cool. We went there, we were presented, and Paul went up there and he talked about our mom from Montechico, and it was kind of like a small version of the Academy Award. It was cool. But
for us, it was the Academy Award.
Here's a little side story. That morning before, I got in an argument with a guy who said California tacos are better than the New Mexico tacos. No, that's
that's scandalous, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well, perhaps we shouldn't bring this up.
We'll put that aside. Sorry.
Yeah.
The things that bring us together and the things that tear us apart.
Yeah.
Right. Well, Carlos, you had mentioned the role of women in the graphic novel. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit more about that, particularly about the presence of really strong female characters throughout.
Well, in our family, we have strong women in our family. Paul and I, my mom, our aunts, our sisters. And so we wanted to portray that in the relationships, and that's why we use them as basically the catalyst for the whole forgiveness issues. So we revolved it around characters that we grew up with, our mom, aunts, sisters, strong Latin characters within our own lives.
Sure. Yeah. Well, our mother raised 9 children, so she couldn't have been weak. She's a very strong woman. Yeah.
I remember a little story to the side when my younger brother Sebastian, he was going to high school, and he came home one day with and told my mom a story about the vice principal at the high school. And my mom, she says, I'm gonna go talk to that guy. And she's a short Chicana, and she went, and his name was Mr. Barefoot. Do you remember him, Paul?
I remember Mr. Barefoot. Yeah.
Mr. Barefoot. He's a big guy, like 6'3", cowboy guy. And here comes my mom, and she put that guy in his place.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay. Because he was not kind to Sebastian, I think. Yeah.
So we have another student question. The student would like to ask, can you talk about the process of creating the novel, specifically the labor of this novel? And I think this is a great part of this question, your successes and failures. So what did you learn? But I think for our students, so we didn't get to do as much drawing as we might have done in another class. In my advanced composition courses, we actually take the time to do a week or two of drawing. So they look at characters and then they draw some of the characters and then discuss that process. And because this is a literature course, we didn't have a chance to do that. So I think students are wondering, what is it like to create, both in terms of, the writing, but also like, how do you put scenes together and things like that, and what are some of the things that worked and didn't work for you?
Well, luckily, Carlos had put the time and effort to turn it into a screenplay, and a screenplay is a graphic novel. It's a blueprint for a movie, but in reality, what are movies but pictures? So we took that and then did it per panels. So the labor was sitting down with Margaret and JC and sitting there and going like, okay, in this panel, we're gonna need this, in this panel. And for every scene, I wanted to make sure the emotions or the action was really shine a light on what we're talking about or what we're trying to express. And as far as, so I guess in the nuts and bolts world of that is you work with people that are smarter than you. Bottom line. So JC and Margaret, they're phenomenally talented. So luckily, once we had them involved, it was an effort of turning them to she worked on a digital tablet, I believe, and then transfer that over to PDF form. And then it was a matter of doing print versions of that. And the failures, well, I don't concentrate on the failures because that's just part of the journey. You're going to have failures. Every day I tell my fiance, a good day for me is if the number of smart things that I did that day outnumber the number of dumb things that I did that day. Because so it's I suppose there's failures on printing costs, because we didn't take this to gatekeepers. We were own gatekeepers, right? So this is just a self-published book. So that's just miles of research. And yes, as far as like printing costs and like, is this ever gonna see the light of day if we're gonna try to be in the red, or is it always gonna be in the deficit of financially? But we're not. It's the love of the story. You have to love the story and hope it finds an audience. And if you can get paid, well, that's a bonus.
Paul, can you say just a little bit more about what you mean by gatekeepers? Because not all of our students understand that yet.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So my decades in Hollywood, you are dealing with gatekeepers that are the ones giving permission to go past. Like if you're trying to get to a director, I suppose I speak about more of the publishing world. So if you have someone that is a reader at HarperCollins or one of the big publishers, it's an upward streaming upward river. I'm getting I'm getting mixed up here. I never attempted to get past the gatekeepers that would the agents and the managers that would take you to the big time publishers, because, well, one, I was afraid, well, I've never tried it, but I was afraid that also our story wouldn't be pure. It wouldn't be a New Mexican story. What if they suggested changes that I wasn't going to agree with? So if you're your own gatekeeper, the downside is it costs money. The upside is you feel a huge sense of accomplishment when you finally do get it done. And that's, yeah. Does that answer the question?
It does. It does. How about Carlos on the process of creating the labor of the novel successes and failures, if you think of it that way?
You could probably speak about the original story, getting it to.
Oh, yes. In fact,
Yeah.
well, I'll mention gatekeepers very quick. For example, gatekeepers is when my brother Julio and I decided to make it into a children's book, and we sent it to New York. Those gatekeepers closed the door on us. Boop, when they closed it. So, but we went to somebody who was open to us, had an open gate, and that was Keep the Soul in Berkeley, California. In fact, Berkeley, California isn't very far from Modesto, is it? Yeah. So.
No, not at all. Not at all. And that's my alma mater, UC Berkeley. Yeah.
There you go.
Go Bears.
There you go. And as far as the process, for us, it took a long time, but it was a natural process. Because I wrote the screenplay, and then we polished the screenplay up, and then the screenplay naturally just formed into a graphic novel because it's the same format as a screenplay. And then the artist came in. So the process was naturally happening. It was a long process. But the failures, let's see the failure. Well, the failures was this COVID-19 hit right at 2020. We had, I was going to go hang out with you guys and drink beer in Modesto.
Yeah. We had Modesto planned. We had Santa Fe planned.
Ohio State.
Yes. Yeah, Professor Aldama.
But none of that happens. So everything's happening through Zoom. And then another, well, that's, we do have futuristic things we're working on, and we're coming into some bumps there, but that's too premature to talk about. Yeah.
I love that you mentioned COVID-19, because had it not been for COVID-19, we wouldn't have had the virtual festival, and I wouldn't have had a chance to meet you the way I did on the panel. I had already met Paul, but I hadn't met Carlos yet, and I just loved the interaction between the two of you, and that brought us here today. And it brought the graphic novel even more so to my attention. One of the things I want to mention, actually, before we get to Amber's question, and I've mentioned this to Paul, is how grateful I am that the graphic novel is available in print, so you can order it at underthecottonwoodtree.com. See what I did there?
Yeah, thank you.
But you can also get a PDF, and this is unusual because it's quite an affordable PDF. And I mention this, and this is important for our educators who are watching this later on to know, because so many of our students, particularly those who have financial issues, don't necessarily buy the books right away. They buy them one at a time as we're reading them. And so to have the PDF available immediately so they can go, and how much is it, $5.99?
Yeah, $5.99.
Super affordable. And I know about half of one of my sections, at least, were buying them right before they were due, because I got lots of questions. They were asking, is it okay to read the PDF? I'm like, yeah, that's why it's there. That's why it's there. So I really appreciate that you have that available, that it's available on the website. And so a related question, then we'll get to Amber's question, is what made you think of doing that? What was the impetus for having that available?
The PDF. If you're a storyteller, what's the point of not letting people access to it? So I wanted a lesser price point, and I wanted the largest audience I could, because I know a lot of kids these days are just sitting there on their laptops or their not phones, the iPads or what have you, and it's easy for them. So I'm like, all right, $5.99 is affordable, and I came up with that price. And I know there's a lot of companies out there that price them higher, but it was to reach a wider audience. And sometimes Margaret's artwork really shines on a computer screen, super, with the light coming through, and I love that. So it was just another benefit there. And you brought up a good point earlier about there's pros and cons to this COVID situation, but yeah, one of the things is these virtual meetups like this. Last month we got to see people from the guy from South America. I forgot his name. He was
from Chile.
Yeah, Chile. Yeah. That was great.
Fernando.
Fernando. That was cool. So
it affords us the opportunity to make it truly international, easily international.
Yeah.
So that's wonderful. Thank you so much for that. Well, I want to forward now Amber's question.
Okay.
She says, the curandera is one of my favorite characters from the book. Does she relate to cultural stories, or maybe how does she relate to cultural stories around you? Or how was she inspired maybe by someone specific in your life?
I'll start off, Carlos, and then you could lead into this. With the curandera, I was really channeling my mother, because if you talk about what a curandera is, she's a healer, right? So with my mom, it was all about her healing qualities, and I gravitated towards that. Now, I myself had never come across a curandera, but Carlos in Las Vegas, there were some well-known curanderas in Mora County, right?
Yes. In fact, I mirror what Paul says. Yeah, it's my mom. But when you're writing a character, it's not absolutely everything from that one person. It's bits and pieces from, like when you're making Sabola, you get the chili, the pork, and so it's bits and pieces. But the main ingredient was, the healing power of my mom. But like northern New Mexico, there's a Jefecita Aragon. She's a curandera from
Mora, right?
Rivera area. She's known. They call her the belly button maker. They could say she's the belly button maker. You know why she's a belly button maker? Because she delivers so many babies. You know how they have to cut the placenta and make the belly button. So she was known as a curandera belly button maker.
Yeah. But culturally, I mean, it is definitely a part of most Chicano cultures, and definitely in New Mexico for sure. Curanderism.
Yeah.
Awesome. We have another question. Tell us about the role. Obviously, the role of the mythical plays a very strong part throughout the book. And I think that folks, I know my students are chatting a lot about the mythical in the book, but also because our student population is about between 54 and 56% Latinx. So we've got lots of Latinos reading the book. And really, it's a magical thing for them to see their own backgrounds brought forth, right? Put into the foreground, and to see that come to life in this graphic novel. So maybe we can start with Carlos, and if you could tell us a little bit about, or a lot, about the role of the mythical in your own growing up, and then how that transferred into the book.
Well, again, it revolves around family and upbringing, and mythical is basically it's our imaginations saying, what if this happens, and what if this happens? We introduced the tree monsters fighting. The mythical comes from the what ifs.
Yeah.
So that was a good answer.
Well, I was gonna say we in New Mexico, they like to reference the tricultures, right? The Anglo, the Hispanic, and the Native American, because I believe New Mexico is unique in that the pueblos, they've been, our great grandmother was Hickory Apache, and in New Mexico, the pueblos, it's so close to us that I had friends that were from the Pueblos, and with as far as their mythology and their beliefs, I know in the Dene studies, they are the hero twins, right? So we said, okay, let's bring this mythology and we'll make it our own, and we'll call them the Grand Twins. And then the Chigualo is our own creation that we extrapolated other either Hispanic or Native ideas. But yeah, as far as growing up, that was the thing is we're dealing with the mythic in Nordic cultures or what have you. I didn't see a lot of the New Mexican mythic creations, and that's why I'm hopefully we accomplished something like that.
I love it. We have another question. Who's your favorite character from the novel? And I would like to add to that because I like to complicate these things. In addition to who your favorite character was, if there's a favorite character, was there a character that was particularly difficult to deal with?
You want because I have some ideas for sure.
Well, go ahead, Nadia, then I'll go ahead and follow.
Okay, yeah, because well, my favorite character, because all these names are family members. Carlos is obviously there. Amadeo, Dennis, Kippy. Or wait, is Kippy's That's sorry. But my favorite character is the one based on our mother, Consuelo Lucero. We took photographs, I used an old photograph of my mom, and I gave that to Margaret. So if I had that photo, it looks just like her. So that's my favorite character. As far as a character that we may have had problems with, I think Jose, Tio Jose, we needed a rambunctious character, and we needed a little bit of comic relief. And he ends up being a popular character, but sometimes people view it as not a positive character. So that, and quite frankly, I think there's some uncles that we based him on, literal. So
yeah, yes, well, I just want to my favorite character. This sounds kind of like a set up question by one of my family members, because if I say Carlos, then they go, oh, I know who that is. So I'm going to say they're all my favorite characters.
Whoa, all right.
Kind of like my mom. Remember, mommies? There's 9 of us. Well, who is your favorite one? Well, you're all my favorite ones. So I can't say, but they all have their different attributes. But I agree with Tio Jose, because at one point we made Tio Jose. We made him out there. We made him like
a little too
much. Like I shouldn't say this, but we had him going to escaping to Mexico and
drinking margaritas on the
he was difficult. We needed to bring him back to like a humorous,
but
not too bad guy. And
but and again, he's not bad guy. He's mischievous, but he does play a pivotal role because he does lead the children to answers in the end. But we had to tame him down, because I think we had him mentioning we actually had him saying that he was divorced and he didn't want to pay alimony.
And he didn't want to take child support to Mexico.
Yeah, that was a little too much. But we left with a tail.
Yeah, look at this. I don't know if I can see it, but look what happens to Tio Jose. His tail is still there.
Yeah, it's still there. Yeah.
He doesn't get rid of it. He loves his tail.
I think that's a little bit of a scandal, to be honest.
Oh, no.
Yeah. It was.
Don't tell nobody. Don't tell nobody.
I'm not telling anyone.
Okay.
Did you have any pushback from because you have such a large family, right? You said you have 9 siblings. Did you have pushback from anyone? I'm thinking specifically of, not from this book, but I interviewed Gilbert Hernandez one time a few years ago, and I was asking him about, of course, we always ask where you get your ideas and the character development. And he was telling me about how some of his particular characters are based on people that he has known, and he changes them and develops them. And he has had folks come up to him, friends, and say, you know, that character seems suspiciously like me.
Yeah.
His response, let me see, I'm going to PG it. His response was essentially, well, if you see yourself in a character who is an a-hole, shall we say, that's your problem, not mine.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Yeah. If you're recognizing that you're that person, that's your deal. Yeah.
Well, for me, it's easy because I'll say, well, Paul's the one who wrote that character. It wasn't me.
That's a good answer. Yeah. No, I mean we can the character Carlos is loosely based on our brother Kevin, who was like a monkey as a kid. He was running around and he was jumping off of one tree branch to the other tree branch and falling down and breaking legs. And so that's everyone has certain characteristics. Definitely the character Cindy is an amalgamation of Mandy, our sisters, Amanda, Cindy, and Sharon, because I mean they help raise me for sure. So I think the good thing, those are homages, and so far, if Kevin thinks that he's upset because he gets in trouble and change into a calf, well, I think he's okay with it. So thankfully, nothing too scandalous.
Well, you know, I should bring this up. The pushback you talked about, pushback. We had the book vented by Professor Enrique Lamadrid, Professor our buddy. You just mentioned his name, Nazario.
Oh, Nazario.
He was one of my professors at New Mexico Highlands University. But there was as far as cultural appropriation, we did have one aspect that we had to take out of the book because there was pushback.
Yeah. There was pushback because even though our great grandmother was Apache, there was some pushback by some of the beta readers about some of the Native American representation. And we had to tone some of the not tone it down, but just sort of correct it. And we didn't want to offend anybody. Professor Enrique, he gave us great feedback on that. Yeah, fantastic feedback. I wanted to say a thank you in the book eventually, but it went to the printers too. Yeah. And by the time we got it, but yeah, Nazario Garcia and Enrique Lamadrid, yeah, they're great.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you all about the glossary. I thought it was really interesting that you chose to have a glossary and then there's a discussion after that. But the glossary in particular, because that's a very directed choice, right? To kind of open up the graphic novel to a wider audience with that glossary. So can you talk, maybe we'll start again with Carlos. Can you talk a little bit about the choice of including a glossary?
Okay, I just wanted to, because the way we grew up, we were like that second generation that our Spanish is muy malo. Oh, it's muy malo. And so, but we added the Spanish flavor in it. So we wanted to add there's a word in there, alamodes. And I remember Paul's buddies from California said, that's a cool word, but we've never heard it before.
Yeah.
But it's a New Mexico word. So what we did is we wanted to make sure we got it correctly. So I want to give another shout out to
Aaron Taylor.
Aaron Taylor. Aaron Taylor, I know he's like us. He has an Anglo last name, but he's a Hispanic from Cuba, New Mexico. So we always sat down on the table and we wanted to make sure he gets the authentic New Mexico Spanish. And so we want you to look at the words, we want you to edit it, we want to make sure they're New Mexico correct and put together a glossary. So this is the catch question we asked him. He said, okay, we sat down and says, okay, the word sapo, what does the word sapo mean? And so we were looking for an answer. He kind of gave us a look and he kind of knew what we were hinting towards. And he says, oh, that means lucky. So, oh, you're hired. You're hired.
Yeah.
So if you look at the glossary, it explains why Why? Because that's a northern New Mexico thing. So literally, sapo means a toad or a frog. That's what sapo means. But in New Mexico, all these little kids playing around and playing pool, playing basketball, use sapo as being lucky. And then he explained it in the glossary.
Yeah. If
The glossary was good because it helped create the flavor of New Mexico, kind of like adding red chili to your enchiladas.
Yeah. We and thankfully Nazario Garcia and Aaron Taylor both looked it over, and there's a few. There's a word that I grew up with called ambers. Like if you're in trouble, you're like ambers, and we're not sure. Maybe it's from hombre. Maybe we're not quite sure. But in the book, we spelled it with a U. But I've noticed other people are spelling it with an O. But I mean, it is what it is. But we wanted it to be true to the words that we grew up with. And there's a few words too that we talked to my dad and asked him, like, do you remember this word when you were a kid? And like, oh, okay, yeah, you did. Okay, so he was like an extra step of linguistic authenticity, I guess.
I wish that
My
I
mom
had
was a
seen
great
that.
reference too, because she
I'm
was
sorry, go ahead.
my mom was a great reference too before she passed away, because she was like her first language was, she didn't learn English until she was in the third grade, but she didn't go any further south than Albuquerque. So it was that northern New Mexico, southern Colorado Spanish, when they all spoke Spanish at one time.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I wish I had noticed that originally. For some reason, I just didn't. I was so into the story of the book that I didn't notice it had a glossary. And now that I know that it's there, and listening to your feedback, your notes on the glossary, I could see having a whole lesson or even a whole week on this from California, where it's Mexican American, and there is Mexican Spanish, there's California Spanish, there are variations. That's not the same as New Mexican Spanish.
Sure.
My mom is from El Paso, from Texas, and that Spanglish there is also very different. That kind of code switching that happens there. So I could see a whole, a couple of weeks on linguistics, on a kind of linguistic imperialism, like what Carlos was talking about earlier. So I really love that you include that. I know that sometimes that's a choice of, well, you either know or you don't. And if you don't know, well, you don't know.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating how these languages evolved, because in northern New Mexico, after the Pueblo Revolt, and then after they came back, the Spanish, these were isolated villages. So you're not communicating with someone. The Californios, when they're separate, their language is developing differently. And obviously I'm not smart enough to speak of this eloquently, but if you talk to someone like Nazario Garcia, he really knows the history.
Well, I want to give you some time. We have about 10 minutes left, and I want to give you some time to talk about, well, anything that you want to speak about related to the graphic novel, of course, anything that you wanted to touch on, but also about projects that you're working on now, anything that you want to share with us, especially if it's scandalo or top secret or exclusive.
Well, I can briefly run over. So these little chamacos, the next stories are tentatively titled Under the Cottonwood Tree and the Ship of Space and Time. So with the next adventure, the idea is we're going to go into historical New Mexico, and we're going to intermingle with the Anasazis. And the Anasazis lived for only a couple hundred years, and they know what happened, but what if they didn't really know where the Anasazis went, right? And then the third story will be called Under the Cottonwood Tree and the Seven Cities of Sabola. So that's a tentative titles. I myself am working on a graphic novel about a young girl coming from El Salvador to New Mexico in California in the 1980s. And then Carlos needs to talk about his Marisol's Monsters. It's a love story with monsters, but also how to conquer your demons in a way and turn them.
Sure. So that's well, of course, I'm working on that project with the 7 cities in Sabola with Paul. We're going back and forth. But my daughter and I are working. What happened with my daughter? I wrote a children's book, and it's basically about a little girl that loses her mom. She's playing in the park. She loses her mom, and ultimately, to these monsters help her, realizing it's the love of her mom that brings her back. And the one who makes her realize this love are her monsters. So the monsters, even though they bring the love, but we're working at it. What happened with my daughter is 3 things happened to her right at one time. She graduated from a University of New Mexico with a degree in architect. She found a boyfriend. She got married, and she went to Spain. And so I said, well, what about the book? Can you? And she's illustrating books. She says, well, I can illustrate it from Spain. And I said,
yeah.
Okay.
Which it turns out great, because she really is. The other day we had a little Zoom meeting, and she showed us the images, and they were fantastic. And I think she's really absorbing the Spanish architecture, and then you could really see it. And didn't she say she sat there in a park, and you have you have Moorish architecture there, and then you have.
Yes. Well, she went to Granada. She was talking about Granada. She said Granada is historical. There's the Moorish, the Spanish, the Jewish. It's all right here. And her and her husband Tiber and herself were on the phone for just talking about the culture.
And I think her artwork is going to reflect that. She's really absorbing it, which is awesome. It would be a different book if she didn't go to Spain.
Yeah, and
I love this so much, the power of travel. Our population doesn't have the opportunity to travel as much, but I'm always encouraging them to do so whenever possible, to make that a top choice. Something that I didn't come from a traveling family at all, but as an adult, I knew that was something that I wanted to do, and it just changes your perspective. It changes your art. It changes your creative, your process, your energy. So I love hearing about that and about the influence there. There was something else I wanted to mention related to, I'm very excited about that. So we've got 2 more Under the Cottonwood Trees coming. Did I hear that correctly?
Work in progress.
Excellent. Yes. And then Carlos's work that's coming up for me as a professor who's always looking for, work like this, very much like this, or I could say unlike this, because they're really, I don't think there's anything quite like Under the Cottonwood Tree out there. It's very rich, and I appreciate that so much.
Thank you.
There's so much for us to dig into, to talk about, and even more than I thought when I first read it. My students are coming up with all kinds of interesting angles on this. And also there's the thing about seeing themselves in this, right? Seeing brown characters, seeing their own mythology represented here, the magic, the magic of the culture represented. It's all so lovely. I want to let you know, if you need someone for a study guide, let me know. Thing that I do, that I love doing.
That'd be awesome.
That'd be awesome. And I want to also give you a chance, because we've got a couple minutes left, to tell us, where can we find you? I've shared underthecottonwoodtree.com, but if our students, if our audience wants to know more about you, find your work, sure. Paul, watch one of your films, where do folks go?
They can, well, as far as Under the Cottonwood Tree, it's underthecottonwoodtree.com. There is also the Facebook page for Under the Cottonwood Tree. I'm gonna put a link just in case anybody wants to see that. Did you see, Professor Rojas? Did you see Under the Cottonwood or The Band from Far Away?
I did. Okay. Tell people what that is. I watched it. It's a documentary.
So in the 1970s, all these guys, my older brothers, went to Hollywood to be on the Gong Show. And I'm sure all your students out there don't even know what the Gong Show is, but it was an adventure. I just put a link if anybody wants to watch it and see how the 1970s and that little bit of fame that people were looking for, where nowadays all you do is go on YouTube and you press send, and then all of a sudden you're famous for 15 minutes. Well, in 1970s, these guys got in a Ford pickup truck and took off and slept in parks. Slept in well, they had one night they slept in a motel, right? And then they eventually they and then they got on the Gong Show. So take a look. That's where if you really want to see a little movie about the Meyer brothers.
Another one of our adventures.
Because we were growing up as kids, we were always either writing comic books or making little sci-fi movies with Super 8 camera that our cousin Kathy Saavedra loaned us, and we're making these little camera movies about these aliens landing in the backyard. It was because in Albuquerque, if you're growing up with not a lot of money, you're gonna have fun somehow, and we're gonna build tree houses, make movies, and draw books. So that was
Since we only got like a minute left, right, Professor?
Yeah, but we can go a little bit over. No hurry.
Paul. This is just for Paul's sake. I know we had an agreement because last time we had talked, I had said I came to terms that I never paid these poor guys for all the labor,
all the hard labor.
Well, he told me, says, well, you can pick some piñons and send them to me.
And he never did. Well, how about those bizcochitos that I see you eating?
Oh, did you see that?
Where are they from? They're from.
You want some bizcochitos instead? Because I ate all the piñons. Yeah, they're all gone.
I know. I'm like, what is he eating?
There's bizcochitos from Great Little
Selena's bizcochitos. She's another northern New Mexico, and she makes bizcochitos. So there you go. Can we make a new deal, Paul?
Okay.
I'll send you bizcochitos.
Okay.
The piñons are all gone. I have one piñon left. Look at that. I found one.
One piñon.
One piñon.
Worth it. But I hope that because I have fond memories of Modesto. That was 2019 was so fun, and you were so gracious with your time to have us there, and so I'm hoping that the students got to visit New Mexico for a small spell.
Taste of New Mexico.
And I can tell you that so we have a date for the 2022 Latinx Comic Arts Festival. It's the last weekend in March, which I think is the 24th, 25th. Okay. We always do Friday and Saturday, so we can have one day when classes are going on and students, professors can bring their classes. And then also so that the unified school districts in the area and all the way out to the Bay Area, actually, we're hoping for next year, can bring full classes to join us on that Friday. And then Saturday is for families. And we are expecting to have our lowrider exhibit again.
Oh, awesome.
It's gotten out. People have been asking me. So we should have that going on. And we're going to have a virtual piece. We're going to have a virtual art gallery because we have a space, for those of you who haven't been there, there's a space to exhibit some art, but it's quite limited. You can only have maybe 15 pieces or so there. So we're going to do the virtual art gallery again. We have 55 pieces in the show.
Oh, wow.
At the moment. Yeah, so we'll have that again, and it's just going to be a huge party.
Okay, awesome. I'm there.
Is Kathy Capper, the lowriders, the space lady, going to be there?
100%. Kathy Capper will be there. I don't know if she knows, but she's going to be there. Shout out, Kathy.
Yeah.
So let me ask you for a final word, and we'll start with Paul. Just what's something that you would like to leave, in particular, leave our students with connected to your work and to your book?
Well, I just want to say they're studying writing right now, right? So one of my favorite authors is Ray Bradbury. So a little advice via Ray Bradbury to any young writers is wake up every morning, write a short story, and do that every day. And Ray Bradbury says, by the time you're going to have 365 stories, right? One of them has to be good. So that's my advice to any young writers out there. And just thank you for your time. And I hope you got a little flavor of New Mexico.
I love it. Carlos?
Yeah, I want to thank you, Professor Rojas, and I want to thank all the students for giving us this platform. But just be inspired by your surroundings. I'm lucky enough to be here in New Mexico, and there's a lot of good mentors like Rudolph Anaya, Les Miltelbad, and then we have N. Scott Momaday. He was a Pulitzer Prize winner. He talked about his upbringing in the Jemez Pueblo area. So they were inspired by the surroundings. So be inspired by your surroundings, and thank you very much from the bottom of my heart.
Really appreciate it.
And thank you so much for being here with us today. I want to thank our special guests. Paul, I wrote Peter in my notes for some reason. Paul and Carlos. I don't know.
Well, that's Carlos's middle name? Isn't that your middle name?
Peter.
I threw myself off.
Wow.
Yeah, Peter Meyer. Yeah.
Paul and Carlos, thank you so much. A
Thank you.
huge thanks also to my children's literature course and our audience. As always, I want to remind everyone exactly what has been said here today, and that is to create the stories that you want to see in the world. Thank you so much,
Absolutely.
everyone.